Welcome to the Healthy Gut Podcast with Rebecca Coombs, the place where you can learn how to achieve a happy, healthy gut. Here's what's coming up on today's show. Welcome to episode 22 of the Healthy Gut Podcast, and today I'm joined by Daniela Paolone, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist, community speaker, chronic illness advocate, and writer in Westlake Village, California. She is the founder of Westlake Village Counseling, where she specializes in supporting those living with chronic illness, pain, invisible illness, and anxiety. And she offers community presentations where she covers these topics and ways to manage them through mindfulness, tapping, health psychology, and more. Daniela's own health challenges with SIBO, chronic pain and illness also led her to becoming an admin for the largest SIBO support group on Facebook for the past 3 years. In her spare time, she enjoys cooking, hiking, being silly with her family, and having tea or some wine with her friends. And on today's chat, Daniela and I talk all about her own personal journey with SIBO, from diagnosis through to treatment and what life looks like for her today. We also talk about the SIBO Facebook group and its history, why they started it, and its role it plays in the SIBO community. And I know that I myself used it very heavily during my treatment phase with my SIBO treatment, and I now love to be able to give back to the group as much as I can. We also talk about the cost of SIBO, both the financial and the emotional cost, and how we can develop our own health dream team, and much, much more. So I hope you enjoy today's episode with Daniela Paolone. Welcome to the show, Daniela Paolone. It's great to have you on the Healthy Gut Podcast today.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, for having me. It's a real pleasure to be on your show.
Yeah, and we connected actually through the SIBO support discussion group, which is now quite an enormous Facebook group for people with SIBO. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about your own personal journey with SIBO and talk more about that Facebook group.
Well, it's really interesting because that part of my journey has a lot to do with the SIBO group. And actually, the SIBO group at this point, I just checked today, is at just over 14,000 members, which is pretty astounding considering it's only been around since January of 2014. And so, honestly, the beginnings of that group and the way it got started was really a game changer for me in being able to learn more about my diagnosis of SIBO and how to manage it. And so I am so grateful that it got started to begin with. And and I don't know, there's a fun little story behind it, which I think, sometimes people who are in the group don't necessarily know about. And really it got started because of the first SIBO symposium that happened in January of 2014, where Dr. Seebecker, Dr. Pimentel, Dr. Sandberg-Lewis, and others presented at the clinic up in Portland. And so I don't know how I found out about it, but I found out about it. I decided to attend via webinar, and a lot of other people did too. And so the nice part about attending it like that was, I didn't have to travel, so I got to stay home and watch it on my computer, and it was a weekend event. But also they gave us the opportunity to have a chat box just for the webinar attendees. So we all got to meet each other that way. And so that's how I met Kenny King, who is the creator of the SIBO support discussion group. And that's how I met other people as well. And so we were all just so excited to be in a space with other people like us, that we didn't want that to go away. We wanted to try and figure out how we can keep these connections going. And so there was a lot of brainstorming, and at the end of the day, it was, decided Facebook would be the best way to go. And at the time, I didn't even have a Facebook account. So I was like, well, I will be more than happy to get everyone's email who wants to be in this group But beyond that, I'm kind of a fish out of water. I don't really know anything about Facebook, which is really funny. And so Kenny was nice enough to, actually get it going and starting it up. But it was really a group effort. It was a community effort. And just having that opportunity for all of us to like get to know each other, to learn about each of our specific conditions and symptoms was really eye-opening. Because prior to that, I was really in the dark. I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know where to look. I didn't know what to research. And the nice part too was the people who did attend in the webinar, who were the founding members of the group. A lot of them were also health practitioners. Maybe they were just health practitioners, and some of them also had SIBO. So it was really a great collaborative little group that we got started with, about maybe 20 members. And then obviously from there, it just skyrocketed to where it is now. So it holds a special place in my heart, as cheesy as that might sound, but I'm very grateful to be a part of that community because it gave me so much.
And I mirror the sentiment. It was the first place, the first Facebook group I found when I went online and started to research SIBO after being given the diagnosis. And I felt so alone and isolated and lost. And, whilst I felt relief at having this diagnosis, I just thought, gosh, no one I know has this, and no one understands what I'm going through. And then I found this Facebook group, which I think at the time when I got into it, there was probably only about maybe 7,000 or 8,000 people in it. So it has grown significantly in the time since I first got involved. And it was really great to know that you could go online and you could be having a rough day and you could put a post up and people from all around the world would be there to support you. It was really comforting to know that.
It is really comforting to know that. And that's the thing I like too, is it's all around the world. Like, the people who I met at the SIBO symposium, many of them are still in the group, and a lot of us, maybe we haven't met in person, but we've had maybe Skype conversations. So we have like our little appointment times where we catch up, or we just have a phone conversation just to check in with each other. So it's really, like you said, it really helped open up the gateway to like not feeling so isolated and like a fish out of water, and totally feeling misunderstood and, like alone in it, and having that opportunity with the amazingness that technology offers us to have these different ways to communicate and to reach out. And I formed friendships with people who live really far from me, but one day we'll maybe get to meet. That would be nice. But in the meantime, we can schedule little Skype sessions and just talk and, just connect on that level. And I think that's a really important part of the SIBO journey, or any journey for someone dealing with the chronic illness, is having some people who you really feel get it, where you can talk, vent, share your ups and your downs, and also be a good listener for them as well, because oftentimes that part of it is really hard to come by. And so the group can offer that in many ways.
It can, and it can be very comforting to know that whilst you may not feel that you have support from friends and family in your immediate world, that you can log on to the group and you'll be able to get the support there because somebody in the group has gone through what you're going through. I don't think I've ever seen anybody put a post up and ask for help and that no one has either a shared experience or similar experience, or at least some support or guidance that they can provide, which can be really, really good when you're feeling pretty low. I think one of the things, and I think it's fair to say this, because it is a platform where often people go to vent and express their frustration in their day-to-day world, that when you first come into it, you might feel that, gosh, all these people are really sick. Where are the positive stories? What's your kind of take on the fact that we are, there's a lot of people out there talking about what isn't going well for them that day, and perhaps not so many stories of all the highs that happen. And there's plenty of success stories out of that group as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Initially, people who maybe are first diagnosed or suspect they have SIBO will join the group, and it can really be overwhelming because the group is so large. People post questions all the time. A lot of them are the same questions too, but that's fine, and everyone is always willing to answer and give support. But you're right, a lot of it is venting. I'm frustrated. I'm so mad at my boyfriend or whatever it is, and yeah, that can really take a toll too. So you really have to check in with yourself and find a balance. It can easily become all-consuming. Dealing with the SIBO diagnosis or any diagnosis where it's really not very well known about, even among the medical, professionals, that kind of brings up its own different challenges that you have to deal with. And so I lost my train of thought.
Well, I think the what I've seen with the group is that that you do need to use the group in an appropriate way for you at that point in your journey. And if I think about myself, in the early days of my SIBO diagnosis, I think it's fair to say I became obsessed about finding out everything I could about SIBO because I was so excited to have a diagnosis finally after so many years of looking for answers. But that obsession, I think, at times became a little unhealthy because I spent a lot of time in that Facebook group and I really took on board the emotional impact of other people saying how sick they felt. And so I had to learn to moderate my time in the group. And as I got well, I now use my time to offer positive suggestions and support to people when I know that when you can see through their posts that they're having a tough time. But I actively choose to stay within the group to share the positive stories that happen from SIBO.
And I'm glad you say that.
You're not
I'm so
only
sorry.
seeing negative things.
Yeah. Yeah, like when I had lost my train of thought and then now it's come back. Yeah, okay, so yes, a lot of the times the comments do tend to be, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, I don't feel people understand me, or, my relationship is suffering, or I just don't feel well, whatever it is. Yeah, that can really take a toll on someone. So you really have to check in with yourself and make sure that you're not, like you say, taking on other people's emotions and experiences. And that can be really tricky when you're already in an emotionally maybe vulnerable place because you're just in the beginning stages of starting to learn about what SIBO is for you and all that comes with it and the social impacts it can have on your life, and the impacts it might have at work or with family, and just any changes that you might have to take on to manage the condition and to work towards getting better. So that can be really hard, but I also think it's fair to say that that's just part of the human condition. In general, we have a tendency to perhaps put more attention on the negative and what's not working. And that's just kind of the way our brains tend to work. Unless you're one of those people who's really into mindfulness practices and practices a lot of meditation. If that's how you are as a person, then that will make positive changes in actually how your brain functions, and less attention would be on the negative and more on the positive. So I just think in general, it's just in our nature to kind of put more attention on the negative. But also, like you say, with that said, we have to just kind of take in the information as we feel ready. And if it's too much, then we need to step back. And when we feel like we're getting the support we need in other ways, or we're just learning in small increments, little by little, at a pace that's like less overwhelming, that's okay too. Because I know a lot of times people who join the group are like, I'm glad I joined the group. It's great. There's so much information, but I'm in information overload and my my news feed on my Facebook account is like dominated by SIBO comments all the time. It's like too much. And so that's where they just have to kind of push pause, check in with themselves and see where they can find some balance. And maybe they just go in there once a week, or maybe they just go in and access the files section of the group and just kind of skim it over, because there are SIBO success stories in there. And there are people who stay in who have recovered from SIBO, or who have gotten to a better place where they have been able to maintain their symptoms and get their life back close to, maybe not absolutely back to where it was, but their quality of life has improved, where they feel like they can really be a part of the world and function and work and live and just feel, you know, be in a much better place emotionally, physically, and health-wise. So some people do leave the group once they get better, which that also makes sense. You know, once you have gotten better, then maybe for that person it just is mentally just in their best interest to kind of put this chapter in the past and move on. But before they leave, I always encourage them, please, before you leave, can you type up, you know, a little bit about your journey, you know, what helped you, you know, what you learned, what were your takeaways, just so that people can have the opportunity to check and look into that for themselves and just learn from your own experiences what worked for them and see what might benefit their own situation.
Yeah, and you talked about the file section of that group, and I think it is often it's an underutilized resource. There's a lot of really valuable information in there, and people often don't see it. So can you talk a bit about what is in the file section, and even how people find it if they're listening to this podcast and thinking, I never knew there was a file section to the Facebook group?
Yeah, that's very true. A lot of people don't know. And I know, like, if you access the Facebook group on your desktop or laptop computer, then you will see at the top of the group, you open up to the group page, and then you'll see like a section, like tabs at the top. It'll say discussion, and that's the SIBO forum where everyone types in their questions and responds to comments and such. And then there's other sections as well. Members, you can see who's in the group, I believe. And then as you go along, the last tab on the far right is actually the files tab. So that's where you would access it. Now, if you're accessing it on your cell phone, it's a little bit different, but you can still get it. I think you just go under more, like you go to the group and then you go to a more button, and then it has files listed in there. I think you know, don't quote me on that one, but it's easier to access on a desktop or a laptop. And in the files section, there's actual information from some of the leaders in the SIBO research and treatment protocols, such as Dr. Seebecker, Dr. Sandberg-Lewis, Dr. Weinstock. I'm sure there's stuff there from Dr. Pimentel. And that's also to say that we have a lot of big name medical health professionals. Some of them are in the top, you know, leading researchers or you know, doctors in this field of SIBO research and treatment that are a part of the group. They're not necessarily active, but it's really nice to see that as an admin. We get so many people who join. I would say like at least 200 a day, generally speaking, I would say is how many join each day. And sometimes I catch some of the names because there's 3 admins. There's Katie, myself, and Kenny. And sometimes I see these big name doctors and I'm like, oh, I get so excited. And that just is really nice to see that there's so many medical health professionals who are in the group who are just there to kind of learn from the patient. And they'll chime in a little bit here and there. And we have to just, you know, remind them that this is not a place to prescribe or to give medical advice. That's something that we have to monitor really well, just among the members in general. But it's nice to see that there is this community of not just the patients in the group, it's also a lot of medical health professionals who are really realizing that this condition is really prevalent and just going undiagnosed a lot. So that really is nice to see.
Yeah, and I think it's great to have to see medical practitioners in there because they can learn so much from just listening to what people with SIBO are talking about. And so I'm sure it can be highly beneficial to them when thinking about, well, how do they support the treatment of a patient? The lifestyle component of living with SIBO is so important, and dealing with a condition like SIBO is so multifaceted. It's not just about popping a few pills and drinking potions to get rid of it. It's really all encompassing, I feel confident that any practitioner in the group will be able to see the other challenges that their patients experience regularly, based on what people are writing about.
I agree. And I think, yes, you're absolutely right. It is a multifaceted approach. And that's the one thing I really, as a licensed mental health therapist, I notice how much it can have an emotional toll on people. Like we've said before, feeling isolated, misunderstood, judged, maybe not being taken seriously by their friends and family who think, oh, they're just being dramatic, or maybe they're just wanting attention or something. I don't know what their problem is, but they got to figure it out or something. Maybe they just don't understand. And that's kind of how the people in their lives are kind of responding, or they just don't know what to say. And the same goes for the patient in, dealing with doctors or other health practitioners. Because before I got diagnosed, I was kind of being told, are you sure? Are you sure you're not stressed? Have you looked at, your stress levels? Because, it sounds like you need to work on that. So it was basically the message was, it sounds like you're kind of just needing to handle your emotional state, lady, and maybe you're imagining things. And that was really an interesting experience. Before I got sick, it was more about, you go to the doctor, whatever I had in the past. I've had a couple surgeries before having the diagnosis of SIBO and really starting to feel the symptoms of SIBO. But in the past, going to the doctor, that was my thing. You listen to what they say, and you follow their advice. And that's kind of how I was approaching it when I finally got diagnosed. It took a long time to get diagnosed. And then I realized that really wasn't working because I was listening to them and I wasn't really getting anywhere, which was really frustrating. So I had to switch gears a little bit, and acknowledge with myself, I know my body best. I know what's going on with my health better than anyone right now because I inhabit my body. I know what it's doing. I know how it responds to certain foods and how my body hurts, and the fatigue and the lack of mental clarity is coming and going, and it's worse some days and less problematic others. And that's not something they're going to really understand. And that's something I think doctors are really slowly getting more and more exposure to. My hope is that as the SIBO conferences continue, that part of the condition gets more attention, because I don't really see it happening as of yet. And that social, emotional part of having this condition or having a chronic illness, I think doesn't get enough attention. And if it doesn't get addressed, it can really make the healing and recovery part a lot harder on the person and also on their family. So it has this domino effect.
It does. It's really interesting. It seems to be such a common story whereby I think the general rule is that, and not everybody is like this, because the other admin, Katie Caldwell, she was diagnosed with SIBO very quickly, and I'm so lucky, thankful and grateful for her experience that she did have that, and where she talks to us on episode 6 of the Healthy Gut podcast. But for the rest of us, I think it's very common that it takes us many, many years, and quite often, and I share exactly the same story as you, whereby I went to doctors and they said, it's all in your head, the blood tests come back fine, there's nothing wrong with you. And I know when I interviewed Angela Pfeiffer on episode 8, we talked about being your own private investigator and really taking ownership of what's going on in your body, because we are the only people that know our body well. And just recently, I had an interesting discussion with somebody in the Facebook group who was really angry that doctors, she felt that she should go to a doctor and they should know immediately what was wrong with her. Mm-hmm. And I was saying, well, we're the only ones that know what's wrong with us. Truly, we are the only ones that really know what's going on with us, because we live in our bodies. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's a very interesting point at where you are in your journey as to whether you feel that you can own what's going on with you, or whether you really want somebody else to own what's going on with you. I personally believe, and it's just my opinion, that in order to get true health, I need to take full ownership of my health, because no one else knows me like I know me.
Absolutely. I mean, I think just like you said, I was telling someone the other day, I said, having SIBO, like you had mentioned earlier, you said, oh, finally I got a diagnosis. Well, that was my feeling too initially, because it took so long of hearing from doctors, oh, well, just try this or that, or, oh, you just need to meditate or go to yoga or try some probiotics. And just actually realizing that having this condition I call it an emotional roller coaster because you have ups and downs. So it took me, which it really isn't that bad. It took me about 3 years to finally get a SIBO diagnosis. I know for other people, it's actually quite a bit longer. But I also know, I'm 34, I also know that ever since I was in middle school, I was having gastrointestinal complaints. And they weren't life impacting, they weren't affecting my ability to go to school. But it gradually just became more and more prevalent as I got older. And by the time I was 25, it was really starting to interfere. And so it's just an emotional roller coaster. And having initially been diagnosed with IBS, I was like, okay, well, that's cool. All right, I got a diagnosis. And then I looked into that more and I said, well, that IBS doesn't give me anything. Like, that's a diagnosis of exclusion. That's just saying, well, we've done these tests. You don't have Crohn's or colitis or this or that. And so we really don't know what's wrong with you. But since you're saying you have these symptoms and they're gut related, we're going to give you this diagnosis and send you on your way. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll go along with what you're saying. I mean, they never told me it's a diagnosis of exclusion. That was something I had to figure out on my own. But I learned, because I kept doing what they said, do a food journal, try some probiotics, do all of these things, and nothing was working. I said, this is more than IBS. I know, I'm not crazy. And at the time, I was in graduate school to become a therapist, so I'm like, listen, I know mental health. I understand that, people can manifest, that is possible. There are conditions where people are under severe distress and they can add to the symptoms or actually create them. And so I told him, I said, I understand this. I said, but this is not that. Like, there is more going on. And so finally, 3 years later, I get a diagnosis, but only because I was like you had mentioned, I was my own detective. I had to be my own advocate. And I stumbled upon Dr. Pimentel's book, A New IBS Solution. And that was the golden ticket for me, because without that book, I would not have had the knowledge, enough of a basic knowledge of what to know to ask for. And that was the problem I was running into. At the time, I was in an information drought. I didn't know where to go or how to even research. I find this book and I'm like, okay, finally, I'm feeling like I have some guidance, like there's a path. And so I came armed and I said, okay, well, this is good. This doctor is the head of gastroenterology at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. I live just outside of the city of LA. I said, all the GI doctors here know who he is. So this book should carry some clout. And it did. I brought the book. My GI doctor said, oh, yeah, I know Dr. Pimentel. I said, okay, well, this is what he is saying. So it was this fine dance of like, hey, I want you to take me seriously because I know there's more going on than IBS, even though you disagree right now, doctor. But this is what he is saying. This is what Dr. Pimentel is saying, and this is because of that information, which I am presenting to you, this is what I would like to do. Will you work with me? So it was kind of like, it got to a point where I had to be like an attorney getting ready to go to court to have my evidence, as horrible as that sounds, but that's kind of how I had to go about it, because I knew that if I didn't have anything, if I didn't have questions, or if I didn't have anything concrete or scientific or whatever, it would just be all for nothing. Like I would go and nothing would get accomplished. No steps would take place. And so that's what we did. He's like, okay. He's like, you want the breath test? He said, let's do these things first. So we had to negotiate. And I said, okay, fine. As long as we can get to the test. And then we get to the test and then it comes out positive. And I am so over the moon. I'm like, yes, I feel validated. And in that moment, I realized, okay, this is a sign, like this is my big takeaway. I have to really trust my instincts here. And this is where I was intuitively feeling I needed to go. This is the direction I needed. And this was the test I needed. And guess what? I was right. They didn't think I had it, but he was willing to go along with me, which I'm very appreciative of, because finally I got the breath test. And then I was excited, validated. Yay, okay, I've got the diagnosis. And then, so that was like the high, the emotional high. And then I'm like, okay, now what? And that opens up this whole other can of worms of like, okay, so this is what I have, and now I'm researching it, and now I'm getting a little overwhelmed because it's not so easy, and there's no magic pill, and there's no magic formula to get better. You just kind of have to plod along, figure it out, what might help you and what approaches to try. So that was then the, oh my gosh, process.
Yeah, and I think that is, it's just such a common process for people where you get that initial relief and then you get the, oh, now what? Oh my God, what am I going to do? I know that my listeners will want to know, because those of us with SIBO seem to be quite fixated on whether you're hydrogen dominant or methane dominant. Are you comfortable sharing whether you were hydrogen or methane dominant SIBO?
Oh yeah, that's fine. I am methane dominant. So that typically, generally speaking, is the harder one to treat. But what I found that helped me was a combination of prescription medication and herbals. I did prescription 3 times. I did 3 rounds of that over. I've also been, let me see. I'd say I've been in treatment for SIBO for about 4 years, but I don't want to scare people. There were also other conditions I was working on as well, so I wasn't consistently treating. I would do a round of treatment and then take a break, give my body a rest, work on other aspects like, adrenal health. I needed to work on my adrenal support. That was a big part of my healing process. But it also took that long because I used a variety of doctors. I went through 3 GI doctors. All of them had amazing strengths, and I learned a lot from each of them. But at some point, we plateaued, or they just weren't willing to keep investigating, because I said, okay, I know I have IBS and I know I have SIBO, but I have some other stuff going on that doesn't fall into these categories, and I need more support here. I need someone who's willing to go along with me on this. And I did come across an amazing GI doctor, which I have now. And because of him, I'm now working with specialists and getting other treatment for other things that are going on. So I'm very grateful. But it's a process, and I had to kind of look outside of my insurance and go outside of that and look at alternative practitioners. I'm a patient of Dr. Seebecker's, and I'm so grateful to be one of her patients because she doesn't take on patients at this point. But she was a big part of my healing process. So I've worked with naturopathic doctors, I've worked with chiropractors who practice functional medicine, and that has been pivotal. Just working with certain practitioners got me to a place where I wasn't lying in bed all day because I was exhausted, where I wasn't in such excruciating body pain, that I got used to it, that I didn't realize I was in pain and I was tired. So for me, it was a combination of prescription and herbals, and also doing a lot of testing to kind of gauge where my numbers were going. Because at a certain point, I had a bad systemic infection going on, which one of my functional medicine practitioners diagnosed. And he said, "No wonder you feel lousy." He said, "Your white blood cell count is just insanely high." He's like, "You poor thing." We didn't know what the infection was, but we worked on it and we did herbal treatments, and I really credit him. That was before I attended the symposium, so that was early on in my journey. But it's a process. It's a process where you learn a lot about all the different approaches that you can take on. And in my case, the way I got to a better quality of life where I wasn't feeling so fatigued and feeling so much pain was trying out these different practitioners. Now, not all of them worked out, but a lot of them did. And I'm forever grateful because they each had their strengths. And I would say a key part of the reason I'm doing better today is because I got help in my adrenal support, because that was pretty low. I was stage 3. I was in stage 3 adrenal fatigue, and working with a specialist who strictly does that kind of work. That was the key for me, because the way he explained it was that in order to really give your body a chance to get the best benefit out of doing these herbal treatments and prescription treatments and all these other approaches, you have to really hone in and give your adrenals that foundational boost, because that's the energy resource your body will be pulling from when you're taking these pills that are going to make you feel tired, where you're going to have unpleasant detox symptoms, where you're going to feel moody and tired, or all of those things. And so that's the resource that your body's going to tap into. And if it's already on empty, then the ability to really get the most out of a particular treatment won't necessarily be there. Now, that's his opinion. I am not a medical professional, but in this case, that helped me. That did. I did see an improvement.
And what does adrenal fatigue feel like for those people that are listening who perhaps have never heard of it, or wonder whether they themselves might have some issues with their adrenals?
Well, essentially, it's just not having a lot of energy, feeling tired, feeling moody. People, if anyone is having like thyroid, if they have thyroid conditions or are borderline thyroid, the thyroid and the adrenals are intimately connected. And so if they're just feeling a lot of fatigue or moodiness, another key sign if someone's having adrenal fatigue is not getting quality sleep. But that's really hard to gauge. And I didn't realize it, that my sleep was not good, because again, just like being in pain, you lose touch with having a perspective about what it feels like to not be in pain, because you're so used to it after a while that you kind of just, it becomes your new normal. And the same goes for not getting quality sleep. At least for me, I can't speak for others, and so those are textbook signs. And so I've heard other people, I know now there's all these gadgets out there that can kind of measure your sleep quality, or when you come in and out of the different sleep states. I never went that route. I I didn't even know that. I don't think that stuff was even around when I was going through this, but just getting that support with supplementation, that was what was needed to kind of build up cortisol levels, without getting too technical. When we're really stressed out, when we're in this place of having a chronic illness, it can really stress our bodies on a biological level, also mentally and emotionally, and that can overwork the adrenal glands to a point where they just get tired. They sputter out, and so that's when the adrenal fatigue can kick in, because the adrenal glands are not operating like they normally should, and so the cortisol levels go down. Hormone levels are impacted. The thyroid hormone is affected because it needs cortisol to be supported, to function within its normal range, whatever that is for the person. But all of this that I'm saying is outside of my scope of being a therapist. This is just stuff I've learned as a patient, and also this is also really tied to the functional medicine world. That's where this information is coming from. It's not something, when I got testing done for my my hormone levels and my adrenal levels, the traditional medicine, at least here in the States, my primary care doctor and the others were just like, oh, well, you just need to take this pill or something. But that was like a Band-Aid. It wasn't really getting to actually the root issue. And so I didn't go along with that because I didn't feel that was what was best for me. And I said, you know what? I think I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm seeing this doctor outside of my insurance. I told them that. And then a year later, we retested and my numbers got better. And they were like, oh, wow, it's working. That's great. I said, yeah, I know. It's an expensive way to go about it, but this is better for me, because this is actually getting to the core issue instead of putting a Band-Aid on something that's still going to be there. So.
Yeah, and if anyone listening wants to learn more about adrenal fatigue and the connection with thyroid and SIBO, I've got a great episode with Dr. Michael Riccio on episode 12, so you can head back to episode 12 and learn more about it there. I think it's something very, very interesting that you're talking about, and we don't experience this to this level in Australia, is around the having to choose to go outside of your insurance cover. And what I find interesting is here in Australia, we have private insurance and we also have a public healthcare system, but we're very used to paying for things. We have to pay for our prescription medication and we have to pay for treatment. And even when we go to see the doctor, generally, we still have to pay something.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's covered by our medical system, we get a discount, but we still have to pay. So the concept for us Australians to go and seek additional support, perhaps with a natural therapist, a functional medical doctor or a naturopath, is not foreign to us because we're used to paying. Whereas what I get the sense from my US-based SIBOers is that it can often be a major barrier for people because they want to, get it all done under insurance. And I do wonder if that perhaps holds people back in terms of getting the right people, the right healthcare team for themselves.
Yes, I think that happens a lot. And also people who have insurance, just because they have insurance doesn't mean they don't pay anything. They still have to pay so much a month for their insurance. They could have a high deductible. So especially right now, the deductibles can be $5,000-$6,000 before, insurance will kick in, for certain, conditions or under certain categories. So even with insurance, it's expensive. Having to pay having to copay, maybe $30 or $50 to go see your doctor or to get your prescription. Just because we have insurance here, everyone's insurance is different too. It's not universal. It's not all the same. It's all different depending on your employer, or if you have your own personal insurance that you have as a standalone. So it's expensive as it is, having insurance. So then the idea of having to find a doctor outside of your insurance because the doctors who are paneled with your insurance just aren't cutting it for you is definitely a barrier, because this condition is very expensive. It can get really expensive quickly. It can get overwhelming emotionally, but it can also get overwhelming financially because of the medications. People, like for example, here in the States, I'm very lucky with my insurance because they paid for my medication. But a lot of people have to, even with their insurance, it gets denied. And that medication easily goes for $900 or $1,000 or more just for a week's worth of pills when Dr. Pimentel's recommendation is to take it for 2 weeks. And so it really can be a barrier to a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely, and quite like you say, quite overwhelming. And there's the financial cost of the treatment itself, but then there's also the additional costs around often changing the way you eat, and quite often people will need to do quite considerable overhauls to their diet, particularly if they've eaten a very classic Western diet, which, you know, here in Australia and in the States, we eat very similarly in the sense that we have a pretty high grain and carbohydrate based diet. And when we move to looking after our bodies with SIBO, quite often we'll need to move more to a protein and vegetable diet, and that can be more expensive and very much perceived to be a much more expensive way of eating as well. How have you coped yourself, Daniela, around the financial and the emotional cost, if you like, of SIBO?
Yeah, I would say the financial has been a tough one. It has been very expensive for me. Again, I got the best of the best support with certain practitioners, but that was also incredibly expensive because there was no chance my insurance was going to even pay for a penny. And then to add to that, all the tests that needed to be done, and it's not just a test you have done once and then that's it. You go back, just like the breath test. There's the adrenal test I did a few different times. Like, my doctor wanted me to do it every 3 months. And I said, listen, I only have so much money, so I'm going to have to space it out a little bit here. I had to stagger for my own sanity, mental sanity, and for the financial end of things. I had to stagger out my appointments with doctors. And I just saw maybe 1 or 2 practitioners at a time if it was outside of insurance, because it's very expensive. So that's the financial end, plus the supplements, not to mention the supplements, just to try and have better digestion and, manage the breath test numbers and to keep the methane low. I would take different supplements for different things and timing out when I would take them. Okay, I'm going to take this pill first. I'm going to wait a half hour. And then I'm going to take these pills, which were the herbal antibiotics, before I eat a meal. So it was, so as far as the social impact, needless to say, I stopped eating out. It was just a lot easier to eat at home and just do that, go through life like that for a little while. And that was really hard for me because I come from an Italian and a Latino background. And so food, the kind of food I, grew up eating, and the sense of community around food, which ties to so many different cultures, that's just our way of connecting. All of that kind of went down. It just became less. Because it was just easier to not engage in that way, because it just would open up so many questions. Oh, why aren't you eating that pasta? Or you don't want to have the tamales, or, whatever it was. And just having to have that conversation, that in and of itself can be exhausting. Because then after a while you start to feel like a broken record. Maybe it's different family members that just aren't aware of what's going on. So you just kind of, I just found myself not doing that as much. The eating with others, like in a social setting or at a restaurant, because then it would just open all these questions up that I wasn't necessarily in the mood to go into, because you kind of just want to escape a little bit once in a while and just like enjoy the moment instead of having to like bring it up again. So that was hard. And also, I think a big part of this was the fact that having it been a long progression of symptoms getting worse before finally getting diagnosed, that takes a toll, because already your sense of self is being kind of challenged. The person you were when you were totally healthy or feeling like really like, hey, I'm good, like that slowly kind of gets chipped away. It happened to me. I mean, I know it doesn't happen to everybody. I think had I been really lucky in getting a doctor who was like, oh, it sounds like you've got SIBO, we got to do a breath test. Man, if that had happened within the first year or so, I don't think it would have impacted me so much as it has. That's not to say that, life is still that way. Life has gotten better and I'm in a healthier place. I can tolerate more foods. I can go out and engage with that food social aspect more easily now. But for a while, that was a challenge. And instead of going to meet friends for lunch, it was like, let's just go grab some tea. Like, I don't even drink coffee. So, or let's go for a walk. But I can't go for a really long walk because, anything more than 30 minutes, that's like too much for my body right now. So I can't do more than that, but we can sit and talk. And, so it had its impact on the things I wanted to do,
And, I think I don't know if anyone has studied this, but, it would be very interesting to know the length of time it takes to get a SIBO diagnosis and the psychological impact that has. And I feel very much like you as well around, because for so many years, no one believed me at a medical level. My mum believed me. She could see. I remember her like patting my very distended belly and saying, oh, darling, oh, gosh, I didn't realize it got this bad, and being quite upset because she could visibly see how much pain I was in. But I really suffered with, anxiety and some depression and just not feeling perhaps that I was worthy, because people were starting to really question my sanity. And it wasn't my sanity that was in question. It was the fact that my guts were just in a really bad state. And I think also you raising just how you have to alter the way you eat and the way you socialize. And it doesn't mean it's forever, but it means it's for a period of time to support yourself to return to health, or to support your journey to health. And I think that I think it's important to tell our listeners that it's also okay to mourn that. I know I mourned my old life. I really missed going out and drinking and eating foods, and it had a very big impact on my relationship. My partner was very frustrated that we couldn't just go to a restaurant because we love food. We're big foodies, and so it had an impact on him as well. And so this little condition, these little bacteria can be quite wide-ranging. What's your advice to anyone who's listening, who's going, yes, that's me, and oh gosh, how do I cope with the social situations? How do I cope with the anxiety I feel around this condition? What have been some of your key takeaways or pieces of advice that you can offer?
I think what really helps, what helped me, and I think what helps a lot of people too, is knowing that it's okay to feel what you feel. Like, don't do your best. It's hard. It's hard to actually follow this advice, but do your best to not beat yourself up over feeling down. If you're feeling down, that's okay. You're allowed. this is a big shift for a lot of people in how they live life and how they interact with others and how they see themselves. This was not a path I had planned, that's for sure. And I'm sure that goes for everybody. No one expects to go through all of these hurdles. And so to have this expectation that we should be more resilient or we should just, buck up and figure it out and we'll figure it out and life will go on. That's not really being authentic. We have to really honor how we feel, acknowledge how we feel, and find those key people who get it. Maybe they have SIBO, maybe they don't. Some of my nearest and dearest friends have SIBO, and some do not. But the common thread is that we understand each other. And to have, if you can find that person or group of core people who are there for you, who say, "Listen, I'm sorry to hear that you're not feeling well, but don't worry. I know we had plans to go see that movie, but it's okay. You know what? Let's just hang out at your house. We'll watch something on Netflix, whatever." Like having someone who understands. Like I'm really not trying to be a flake, like I just don't feel well, or all of a sudden I have these terrible symptoms of nausea, and or I feel really lightheaded, and I don't think it's safe for me to get in the car and drive over to see you. If you can find people who really understand that and know that you're not trying to see, you're not wanting their sympathy, because getting that kind of feedback when you're dealing with something when you're already not feeling well can often make you feel even worse because you're just feeling more like pathetic, like, oh God, I'm getting pity from this person. And that's really not what I want. So for people who are listening, who are friends with folks who have SIBO, just listen, just go, "Hey, I'm sorry you're having a hard day. I'm here for you. Let me know if you need anything." And I think just getting that kind of feedback can be so powerful and healing and comforting. So just acknowledge where you're at. And the other part too,
Mm.
yeah, acknowledge where you're at, and it's okay, and how can we expect ourselves to feel good and happy when we're in pain? Like that just doesn't make sense. If you're in a lot of pain physically, emotionally, it's just not the way, it's not how our body operates. And that's like just how our brain and our gut is connected. And that's connected by this highway called the vagus nerve. And that sends signals. So if someone is sick with an upset stomach or they have the stomach flu, I don't imagine they're going to be in a good mood. That's not the case. And so I kind of explain it to people like that sometimes. It's like having the stomach flu or having a long-standing flu or virus that just is not going away. And some days you're feeling better and other days you're not. But if you have that imbalance in your stomach, you've got, you're just feeling unwell or you ate something that upset your stomach, that sends signals through that vagus nerve and communicates to your brain and says, "Hey, something's haywire with your stomach, so I'm going to match that." So if the stomach is in distress, it's going to send that message to the brain and say, "Oh," and that's going to make the brain feel more stressed, anxious, irritable. And so it's only natural for us to have these different moods and experiences. And also, if we're dealing with SIBO or any other health condition, there's a possibility that we're also dealing with inflammation. I know that was my case because I had a high white blood cell count. And so my doctor said, "Wow, your inflammation, no wonder you're in a lot of pain. You've got a lot of high inflammation markers." That came up in another test. He said, "That makes sense because your white blood cell count is high." So if you've got a lot of inflammation in your body, that can often connect and tie into feeling pain in your body. And when we're in pain, we're not going to be in a good mood either. I mean, so a lot of this, we just have to cut ourselves some slack. Like A causes B to happen sometimes, or B causes A to happen sometimes. So if we're anxious in our minds or we're really stressed out, that can cause us to have a nervous stomach too, like anticipating something that can, worsen our symptoms. So I don't know if that's overwhelming for people, but I don't know. I try to
Yeah.
normalize it a little bit because there are things also beyond us that's beyond our conscious thinking that are happening on a biological level that kind of can take over too.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the pain piece is really interesting and important to talk about because this condition is painful as a general rule. Most people, not all, but most people have some discomfort or pain from it. And I think back to myself, and I used to almost look out for the pain. I was very used to pain because I was in pain all the time. And my pain threshold, interestingly, in my abdominal area is very high because I've had so much of it. In other areas, I get a tiny splinter in my finger and the world is ending. But if I get really intense stomach cramps, in fact, my appendix was rupturing and I was refusing to go to hospital because I thought it was just another bout of stomach cramps. And I was gasping for breath because I was in so much pain. And it was only a friend who said, if you don't call an ambulance, I will. I said, okay, I won't call an ambulance. I'll just call a doctor. And they said, go straight to hospital, and my appendix ruptured. And I was very, very unwell. But the point I'm trying to make is, I think, what's your view around the real pain versus perceived pain when we're waiting for pain, or we're expecting pain? Do we then therefore create the pain because it's so present in our everyday lives?
I think, yeah. We can definitely become hyper vigilant, like hypersensitive, not like emotional sensitive, but just hyper aware of our bodies because of the unpleasantness that SIBO brings. So if we eat something and then we have this like horrible reaction to it, that can kind of scar us a little bit and make us kind of feel or become a little more hyper vigilant. So then it can kind of be this anticipatory fear of like, oh, I don't know if I want to eat at that restaurant because last time I was there, I got so sick, or I felt fine then, but then I got home and I was just curled up in a ball because I was in so much pain. So we really have to, as hard as it is, we really have to try to work on managing our stress and working on the dialogue we have within ourselves. Because if we continue to go into that, oh, I don't want to do this because this is what's going to happen, or I just know I'm going to feel this way. Well, actually, if you were to kind of think of, well, from a psychology standpoint, the words we say, do have a resonance within our body. So if we're putting that out there, verbally outside or just within ourselves, we're actually working towards making that come true. It's kind of called the self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you keep saying something enough, it can actually happen. So we have to be really careful in how we phrase things, how we work on thinking about things. Okay, fine. Acknowledge that the last time you were at that restaurant, you had a horrible reaction. Okay, I know I'm going to feel a little uncomfortable going to this event or going back to that restaurant. However, I'm going to be really mindful, and instead of letting them season the vegetables, I'm just going to ask it to be prepared this way, and I'm going to bring my own seasoning or something. So there's a shift in that dialogue, because the more we're able to have that shift in our dialogue of allowing there to be an opening for resolution, even in the smallest increments, that plays a part in how we perceive pain. So if we are really emotionally upset about something and we're feeling pain, the likelihood of us saying that pain is very intense is a lot higher than what that pain would be if we were in an emotionally neutral place. I'm referencing an actual study between two groups of people. One group had fibromyalgia, a diagnosis of that, and the other group did not. And they were both given an electrical stimulus of pain. And each person in each group had to do this twice. And the first time the scientist said, I want you to think of an emotionally neutral event, and I'm going to think of it now. Okay, you're going to get the stimulus of pain, and I want you to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And then at a later time, they revisited that same patient, and this time they said, I want you to think of an emotionally upsetting event, And the patients didn't know it at the time, but the scientists gave them the same level of intensity of pain. And those people consistently in both groups reported that pain to be a lot higher when they were emotionally upset. So it just goes to show that our emotional state and how we cope, what outlets we use to de-stress, to vent, can really play a part in how we feel within our bodies and how intensely we feel the pain.
So that's really interesting because when, I know with SIBO, it can be such a vicious cycle that you feel pain, you get anxious, and you can go into a very negative emotional state. You then feel more pain. It's very much, I can see how that could be very interlinked and looping, and making it worse. Have you got any techniques that you used with yourself, or perhaps even in your work, that can help people kind of move out of that state?
I think the biggest thing that can help people, it also depends where they're at, though. I mean, if they're newly diagnosed, they're overwhelmed and stressed, then this might be a little bit too much to even consider right now. But if they feel that they're in a place where they're more able to feel calm within themselves and have the ability to more easily problem solve, their thinking isn't foggy or anything like that, then, if they can just practice breathing techniques, I mean, that's a good place to start. At first it can be overwhelming because people are just trying to survive and get through the day. And so to add on something else right at the initial onset of the journey for them this might not be in their wheelhouse at the moment. But maybe once they've kind of gotten used to their new routine or the changes that they've had to implement, then adding this in would be a good time for them to kind of consider this. But just deep breathing, I mean, that's where you kind of imagine your belly is a balloon. So as you inhale, that balloon expands out, and as you exhale, it goes inward towards the spine. And I actually have a guided imagery audio. It's free for people to download on my website. You sign up for my newsletter. I send an email out once a month. And so in the email chain that goes out, a series of 3, when you confirm your email, you also then get to download that audio that I put together. And it's this guided meditation where I help walk you through breathing in and out. I have the ocean in the background. I actually went to the beach and recorded the waves. and just making some kind of a regular practice, if you can do it every day, that really can do wonders in calming down the nervous system, calming down the body. And when we're able to do that deep belly breathing, just bringing that oxygen in relaxes the muscles, calms the mind. It has this wonderful calming effect on the mind and clearing, where you're able to think more critically. You feel less triggered by things that might be a nuisance. Maybe you find yourself not feeling as reactive. All of those things over time, if you make this a practice, I've heard it said that if you stick to some kind of a relaxation practice, a meditative practice, guided imagery for like 21 days, something like that, if that's something you feel you can do, that can help lead to more impactful, positive changes in how you feel within yourself and how you feel emotionally. And also, just by doing that deep breathing, you're calming down your nervous system. And when you do that and your muscles are more relaxed, you will also feel less pain, because when we're in pain, our bodies are tense. There's this rigidity in our bodies. But if we're able to relax those muscles just by getting that oxygen in and relaxing those muscles, that can really help get us to a place where we're not feeling as intense of pain. So that's I think the first thing people can do. And there's so many apps out there as well to try. It's just a matter of finding something that works for you. And meditation or guided imagery, it doesn't have to be this daunting, intimidating thing. The recording I have is only, I think, 6 or 8 minutes long. That's it. It's not like this whole time consuming thing. It can easily be done first thing in the morning or maybe right before you go to bed to kind of help you transition into sleep. So if you can find ways to just calm the body, maybe journaling is something, writing how you feel, or just having that connection with someone to have an outlet to vent. There is the SIBO forum to do that, but also having that one-on-one interaction with someone. Maybe that's a therapist, a support group, in-person support group, or talking to a friend. All of that helps. I also like to use tapping, which is also called emotional freedom technique. And what I like about that is it really does have this benefit in helping calm down our nervous system. If you tap, it's like tapping on these meridian points in the body. So it's a combination of acupuncture and on the meridians, it's kind of a combination of those two approaches. But if you were to tap for roughly 30 minutes, you could actually reduce the levels of cortisol being produced in your body, which is that stress hormone that gets released when we're really stressed. So tapping not only helps to calm down the nervous system, but it also can have a positive impact on our body, our biology. It can turn on and off genes, gene mutations, how genes express themselves. I should phrase that differently. It can alter how genes are expressed. This has been well researched. And so I really like that. And I use it a lot with my clients, mainly to help them work on calming themselves, feeling more grounded, and also in managing pain. Because a lot of the experiences people go through when they're dealing with an illness or SIBO is a lot of that just kind of continues to reside in the body and it doesn't get processed. So the frustration and the anger that someone is feeling, like, why can't I get better? What's wrong with me? If they're not getting it out in some way, it's kind of just residing in the body, and that can further feed into them not feeling well and further contribute to the physical pain or the emotional pain that they're feeling. So this kind of helps in releasing that and working on these core beliefs that we all have certain core beliefs about ourselves and kind of accessing that. But tapping people can do on their own in managing pain, but it's also something you want to be mindful of because it can bring up core beliefs, deeper issues that then should be, you should be in a process of being guided in that process with someone who has the training to kind of walk you through that. So I always kind of mention that too.
Wonderful. And if anybody wants to access or get a link to be able to sign up to your newsletter, I've put the link in the show notes, so you can go to that and connect with Daniela. I'd love to know, how is your health today? You've been on such a journey. How do you feel today after everything that you've been through?
Honestly, I'm feeling pretty good these days. I'm so happy that I don't have the distended belly like I used to. That's a big one. I mean, it'll happen from time to time, but my energy is so much better. Mental clarity is so much better. I'm feeling, more grounded. Like, I don't ever anticipate that I'll live life like I did before I got sick, but I'm definitely on that path of really moving into this newer, evolved version of myself, and being able to be in a much healthier place is so rewarding because it allows me to give back in different ways. So I now have more energy and more stamina to go out and have little talks in the community about chronic illness or pain or whatever, is related to that, or sleep. And I'm now better able to work, as a therapist and provide support to people. Whereas before that was a lot harder to accomplish. So things are looking good.
That's awesome. It's so wonderful to hear, and I think that those of us that are feeling a lot better after experiencing chronic illness, life is different. It isn't the way it used to be, but that's okay. And I love my new life, and I wouldn't go back to the way it was. I wanted it to be the way it was when I first started my journey, but these days I really love how life has turned out, and I look forward to how it will be in the future. And I couldn't do what I do today if it wasn't for the fact that I'd had to go through this journey myself. So, Daniela, I'd love to thank you for coming on to the Healthy Gut podcast today. You've just shared such great wisdom and insight from the patient's perspective around what it is like to live with this condition. If people would like to connect with you, what's the best way for them to make contact with you?
That's a great question. They can go to my website, and on there I have my email listed. I have my cell number. If you're in the United States, you can call me. I have that's my business number, and we can connect that way. And they can also find me in the SIBO forum, because I'm one of the admins, so you can always tag me in the group. I tend to be the one who puts the pinned post with the guidelines and the group rules and all that fun stuff, so I'm usually pretty easy to connect with in that way. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you and sharing and spreading awareness.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed episode 22 with Daniela Paolone. You can find the show notes and full transcription of today's episode at thehealthygut.co/Daniela, and that's spelled DANIELA. Now, I absolutely love hearing your feedback, so don't forget to leave us a rating and review in iTunes or the app you use to listen to this podcast. And if this has been helpful for you, it may be helpful for somebody else you know, so don't forget to share it with your family and friends, as it may be something that can just help them on their own journey. And we love connecting with you, so come follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Pinterest, and Google+. All you need to do is look for us under The Healthy Gut. On next week's show, I'm joined by Dr. Robin Kutka, who specialises in SIBO and other conditions like hormones. And she and I have an absolutely wonderful discussion, which personally I found so informative, about the role that hormones play in our lives and why for many people, hormones can be the missing link underneath what is going wrong in your system when conditions like SIBO don't get cleared quickly. So I'm sure you will find my interview with Dr. Robin Kutka next week extremely fascinating. We'll see you then. You've been listening to the Healthy Gut podcast with your host, Rebecca Coombs. To learn more about the Healthy Gut or our podcast, head to thehealthygut.co/podcast. And as we are fully funding this podcast, if you would like to help support the continuation of this podcast so that we can continue to bring you future episodes, all you need to do is make a contribution at thehealthygut.co/podcast. We would like to thank Belinda Coombs for the production, editing, and original music score of this podcast. To hear more of Belinda's music, head to soundcloud.com/Belinda Coombs. The Healthy Gut podcast is a production of The Healthy Gut. Thanks for listening.